Final ending to The Red Sky, updated part 1 down below. 3 weeks after the Marcy Martin concert, Richard's lawyer, Barbara Trenton, delivered the divorce papers to Mary Beth. She initially responded with loud laughter, underestimating the financial toll a divorce would take on Richard. "It's cheaper to stay together," she joked. Her friends Noel and Chrissy found amusement in the situation as they gathered in Mary Beth's kitchen, but Jewel seemed uneasy. "This has to be the worst decision he's ever made," Chrissy said, attempting to mimic street slang. Noel, snickering, scrolled through a list of lawyers on her phone. The Benhurst area had numerous law firms and solo practitioners, yet to Mary Beth's shock, each one informed her they were already representing Richard, making it a conflict of interest to take her case. "What do they mean, conflict of interest?" Noel exclaimed, puzzled. Jewel clarified that it meant they couldn't represent Mary Beth because they were already working for Richard. Noel was incredulous, questioning how Richard managed to secure so many lawyers. Jewel explained it was simple, he just needed to book a consultation, with retainer fees varying significantly. Upon reviewing the petition again, Jewel remarked on Richard's choice of Barbara Trenton as his attorney, noting her exceptional reputation. Jewel mused about the notion of ever leaving her partner, affirming their deep connection but acknowledging Trenton's competence. Noel, filled with indignation, proposed suing Richard, questioning the legality of his actions. Mary Beth, curious about Jewel's detailed knowledge, prompted her to reveal that she worked in it for a prominent law firm. Jewel confessed, indicating that Richard had already secured their services through Jeremy Wilcox. Explained to Wilcox the scheme Richard's involved in, Chrissy insisted. "And there's nothing legally Jeremy can do," Jewel replied with a sigh. "Where's Buddy employed?" inquired Noel. "He's at Curtis Construction," Jewel responded. Noel then located a lawyer in Rackwell Falls, the next town over. Sam Feldman, age 79, well beyond the typical retirement age, claimed his passion for work kept him going. "And retire. My Edna would have me running endless errands," he joked dryly. Mary Beth arranged to meet him the following afternoon. Jewel left before anyone could question her about the elderly Sam Feldman. During the appointment, Sam was awkwardly friendly with Mary Beth as they discussed the divorce paperwork. Claims of irreconcilable differences, yet he alleges proof of betrayal, Sam noted. "That's ridiculous." "Interesting," Sam noted, keeping his views on her choice of words to himself. "Mrs. Trahan," whispered Sam's assistant, entering the room. "Your credit card has been declined." "You've got to be kidding me. He didn't do that, did he?" Mary Beth exclaimed in dismay. Like before, Richard had taken care of the financial responsibilities for their first home and the needs of Andy and Jackie, covering the mortgage, insurances, and utilities for both houses, along with the car insurances. Mary Beth discovered another service cancellation while rummaging through her purse. Sam allowed her to use his office phone to contact her father. Luckily, she connected with Sandra. After Richard announced his intention to divorce their daughter and explained his reasoning, Albert was too upset to be of any assistance to Mary Beth. "Is it another person?" Albert inquired, visibly upset. "Oh, it's probably trivial. I often greet my friend Louise with a kiss," Sandra remarked. Of course, Richard exhaled, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "But I presume one could manage that without having to strip down completely." "Their clothes," Albert uttered, his voice faltering. Sandra handed over her credit card details to the administrative assistant, authorizing a payment of $2,000. She also arranged for Mary Beth's phone service to be reactivated. Jackie and Andy couldn't help but find a slight humor in the situation when Mary Beth revealed that Richard had left her. Their amusement turned to concern when she added that Richard had canceled her credit cards. "But you still have your debit card, right?" Jackie asked anxiously. "You can withdraw money, can't you?" Mary Beth checked her bank account at an ATM, only to discover a balance of $25.05. She initially missed the significance, the $25 symbolizing their upcoming 25th anniversary, and the 5 cents for their 5 children. Attempting to reach Richard for her rightful half of their finances, Mary Beth was met with a recording that his phone number had been changed or disconnected. After being redirected to Richard's voicemail at the school, she left a message about her claim to half of their assets, though she suspected he would just erase it. In the home office, she discovered both the computer and the physical bank statements, usually stored in Richard's desk, were missing. When on Earth, Mary Beth muttered to herself, scanning the room. When did he take everything? She started noticing other absences throughout the house, the empty spot on the mantelpiece where his trophies used to be, the depleted bookshelf, and the missing gun rack, and the guns it once held. She noted the faded paint on the wall where the rack hung and the layers of dust on the mantel and shelves. In their bedroom, her side of the closet was untouched, her numerous pairs of shoes still neatly lined up. However, Richard's side was almost empty. Among the few remaining items, nothing seemed particularly notable. The bright yellow windbreaker, some ties including one with a butterfly pattern, a pair of sandals, slippers, and a few shirts hung on the otherwise empty hangers. His 2 drawers in the chest were nearly empty. He had left behind a pair of holiday-themed boxers, a few t-shirts, and some socks. Atop the dusty chest lay Richard's wedding band, a stark reminder of what had been. The nightstand bore no trace of his presence. The space where his alarm clock once sat now just a dusty outline. In the drawer, Mary Beth found a box with a single item left, next to an unopened tube. Toby, the cat, jumped onto the bed, meowing in confusion at the absence of Richard's pillows, his favorite spot. Mary Beth sighed. "Daddy's not here, baby," her voice heavy with fatigue. Suddenly, Noel and Chrissy were unavailable for any plans or financial help, citing their own preoccupations. Sam Feldman urgently convened a meeting with Barbara Trenton and Richard Trahant to discuss interim financial arrangements until mediation. Insistently, Sam scheduled it for 10 o'clock, disrupting Richard's teaching schedule. Upon seeing Richard at ease and chatting with Barbara Trenton, Mary Beth's frustration boiled over. She burst into the conference room, unleashing her anger on Richard. His calm demeanor only fueled her fury, leading to a physical altercation, reminiscent of a past family incident. This outburst resulted in her being escorted out by security and her lawyer, Sam, severing their professional ties, retaining the hefty initial fee. Albert Rossini then connected her with Frank Castro, an attorney recently back in practice after a suspension, to take over her case. Frank reviewed the transferred files with a skeptical eye. "Ms. Trahant, our next discussion will likely take place in the presence of a mediator," he stated. "Should the mediator fail to settle our disagreements, we'll proceed to court. And should you confront Mr. Trahant again, I assure you, the courtroom outcome will not be favorable for you. Do you comprehend?" Noel and Chrissy were overwhelmingly occupied. They had no time to visit, unwind in the hot tub, or share in the consumption of the beverages Richard left behind. Financial assistance was also beyond their capacity at the moment. Similarly, Jewel and Buddy were engulfed in their own affairs. Observing their Toyota Prius parked outside, Mary Beth pondered over their busy schedules. A call arrived from an undisclosed number. After hesitating, Mary Beth answered. "The lawn's overdue for a trim," Richard remarked. "I've arranged for Al Montoyas and his son to handle it. Please, no confrontations with them, all right?" "Ridiculous. You find this amusing, don't you?" Mary Beth retorted furiously. Richard had also sent Al and his son Michael to attend to the lawn at another property. His update to Jackie, his daughter, about the maintenance, elicited a barrage of grievances from her concerning various household issues. Weeks later, Jackie reached out to Mary Beth. During the call, Mary Beth noticed the dwindling supply of the premium cat food Toby, Darren, and Samantha preferred. Richard had argued that no cat would let itself starve. They'd eventually eat the cheaper cat food she provided. "Mom, guess who Dad's new companion is?" Jackie inquired with excitement. "His new what?" Mary Beth responded. "We're at Benny's Burger Bar. Just saw Dad assisting a rather large lady into his truck," Jackie snickered. "Seriously, Mom, she's quite big. He's out enjoying himself, while I'm struggling." "Jackie, can you follow him? I need to know where he's staying," Mary Beth instructed. "Mom, they've already left," Jackie informed her. Thus, Mary Beth crafted a strategy. She decided to park a distance from the school at the time Richard would depart, planning to tail him. On the first day, as Richard was occupied with football tryouts, Mary Beth sat in her car, battling the heat, her gas tank nearly empty to run the air conditioning constantly. She brought along a few bottles of water for relief. As she sat there, watching Richard's truck and hydrating, she suddenly felt an urgent need to find a restroom. After her visit to the fast food restaurant's restroom, she returned to find Richard's truck missing. Frantically, she drove around, narrowly avoiding a collision with a bicyclist. But the truck was nowhere in sight. The following day, her car tank full thanks to Sandra's credit card, Mary Beth sat with the air conditioning on full blast. However, her peace was shattered when a police officer knocked on her window. A report had been made about her car lingering suspiciously near the school. A local, observing the unfamiliar vehicle for the second consecutive day, suspected malicious intent towards the students. As the officer verified Mary Beth's identity against any potential alerts, Richard drove off in his pickup. The tension escalated to the point where the officer cautiously reached for his gun, as Mary Beth erupted in frustration. "Good old Mrs. Rittmuller," Richard chuckled, spotting the police car behind Mary Beth's luxury vehicle. The elderly widow, Mrs. Rittmuller, lived opposite the school and considered it and its students under her protective gaze. She had a history of community vigilance, from disrupting illegal activities to reporting inappropriate behavior. Richard commented on her watchful nature as he acknowledged her from his truck. Mrs. Rittmuller, though not of the same faith, had promised her estate to the school, showing support by attending games unless bad weather kept her indoors. On the third day, Mary Beth drove past the school without stopping, her frustration audible. Richard's truck was absent again, but she missed the pale blue car that took its place. Noel, Chrissy, Jewel, Buddy, Jackie, and Andy were all preoccupied, unavailable to monitor Richard's movements in Benhurst, Colorado. Frustrated in her attempts to gather information, her son Peter suggested a more direct approach. "Hey Mom, why don't you just talk to him?" "If I had his number, I would," Mary Beth retorted sharply. "You wouldn't happen to have it, would you?" "Well, he's my father," Peter replied, a bit amused. "So, give it to me," pressed Mary Beth. Jackie and Andy claimed they're clueless about it. "Ask him yourself, Mom," Peter suggested. "Anything else you want to know?" Yes, college is challenging, but I managed a 3.8 GPA. Need money? Sure. My scholarship doesn't cover everything, especially not the extras. And no, there's no significant other in my life, but I'll be home for Thanksgiving. Love you too, Mom. Nice chatting. Mary Beth was visibly irritated when Peter ended the call. She went to the pantry, sighing as she filled the cat bowl with more food. I know, sweetie, she said, trying to soothe Toby, who mowed sadly. But we're running low because your dad hasn't sent any support. We can't afford the good stuff until he does. Her phone rang again. Seeing her mother's name, Mary Beth exhaled deeply, bracing herself for another conversation about finances. Who was that young woman with Richard last night? Sandra inquired. How would I know, Mom? Mary Beth responded, clearly frustrated, as Toby turned away from the bowl. Your father and I went to Rio del Sol. He insisted on getting their burrito al carbone, despite his constant heartburn, Sandra recounted. You both went there. Mary Beth sounded envious. Didn't catch a glimpse until your father went to the restroom. He's been like that lately, up and down. But anyway, there was Richard with this young woman, looked to be around 19, Sandra narrated. They were near the window, which I couldn't see because of the glare. Need to see Dr. Percy about my eyes. When they left, I noticed how young and pretty she looked. A bit sturdy, perhaps, but Jackie called her overly large, Mary Beth commented with a hint of sarcasm. Jackie's not one to talk. Is she planning on continuing her education, or just lounging around? She's nearly 25, it's time she did something productive. Speaking of which, did you ever apply for that receptionist position at Curtis? Your neighbor works there, right? Sandra probed. Yeah, Mary Beth fibbed. Still waiting to hear back. This girl with Richard, what did she look like? As I understood, she had a knack for indulging in pastries, slightly petite, and her blonde hair was trimmed in a charming style, not too short but just right. And your friend Chrissy, how is she? By the way, you still haven't told me who this person is, Sandra inquired. Mom, is it possible for you to stick to one topic? Mary Beth implored, her patience thinning. Well, Miss Know-It-All, here's a topic for you. It's time for you to find a job. The mediation isn't for another few weeks, and supporting you is draining my finances. I've done my part. I supported you through college and helped you stand on your own. Now it's time for Mary Beth to take charge of her own life. How's that for staying on topic? Sandra retorted sharply. That was spot on, Mom, Mary Beth replied tersely. Communicating with Noel and Chrissy became a game of voicemail tag. Jewel occasionally answered Mary Beth's calls but was quick to hang up. Andy consistently ignored his phone, despite Mary Beth's reminders that she was paying for it. Jackie was unpredictable, sometimes available and other times not. Mom, your behavior is exasperating, not just to me, but to everyone, Jackie eventually burst out. When did you become so grievance-filled? As the mediation day approached, Mary Beth chose a modest dress and attractive heels but struggled with the dress's zipper. Frustrated, she opted for a conservative skirt and silk blouse, which also proved uncooperative. Settling on an elastic skirt and a more forgiving top, she had to rethink her footwear choice. Driving to the mediation, she noticed her car was low on fuel, with the gauge indicating only 12 miles left. She parked several blocks away from the courthouse to avoid the parking fee, feeling the crisp autumn air reminding her that Thanksgiving was near. Peter had mentioned coming home for the holiday, sparking a hope in Mary Beth that her family would host the Thanksgiving meal. Arriving at the imposing marble courthouse, Mary Beth took a moment to catch her breath after the walk, feeling the weight of the impending mediation as she ascended to the third floor. Frank Castro encountered Mary Beth in the corridor. With a low, urgent voice, he implored her to respond to any inquiries with utmost honesty. If she was uncertain about something, she should admit her lack of knowledge rather than fabricate a response or speculate about the mediator's expectations. Being truthful means you don't need an excellent memory, Frank remarked. He observed Mary Beth's expression become stern as she noticed Barbara Trenton and a tall, handsome man approaching. Don't talk to him, Frank whispered with emphasis. And don't interrupt him when he's speaking. I'll give you a notebook and a pen. If he says something incorrect, jot it down, and I'll question him. Got any queries? Note them, and I'll raise them. Understood. When did he change his hairstyle? Mary Beth muttered with a scowl, noticing Richard in a new suit and a neatly trimmed haircut. Ms. Tryon, did you grasp anything I just said? Frank exclaimed, frustrated. Barbara Trenton was advising Richard Trahan similarly to how Frank counseled his client. Avoid conversing with Mary Beth, don't cut her off, and write down any questions for Barbara to ask. The court officer opened a door, calling for Trahan v. Trahan. It's pronounced Traha, Richard corrected with a smile. Wasn't sure of the pronunciation, the officer returned the smile. Some names really make you wonder, don't they? Richard laughed, quickly bonding with the bailiff. Priscilla Scylla Ailes, a petite and slim woman in her late 50s, was characterized by her stark black hair pulled back into a tight bun, her makeup-free face, and her modest attire. She acknowledged Barbara's and her client's introduction with a nod and allowed a faint smile when Frank and his client were introduced. It's nice to see you again, Mr. Castro, and congratulations on your reinstatement, she greeted calmly. Thank you, Ms. Ailes, Frank responded with a smile. It's great to be back. Those student loans won't pay themselves, right? Scylla, Barbara, and the bailiff exchanged amused glances at a light-hearted comment. They all took their seats at a table, with the bailiff standing close behind the group, who faced Scylla and an elderly lady equipped with a small recorder. I believe you've been briefed by your legal representatives about my role here, but just to make it official, I am the mediator. Each of you will present your perspective on the separation, the end of your marital relationship. I will then make a decision. If there are no challenges or changes to my decision, it will be forwarded to a judge for approval, and in 3 months, the marriage will be legally ended, Scylla explained. This is Ms. Benning, our court reporter, who will document today's session. What happens if we can't reach a decision? Barbara inquired for more information. In that case, a judge will be involved to listen to the arguments and make a final decision. My role is to facilitate and reduce the caseload, Scylla replied. Any questions? Agreed, Frank stated. Agreed, Barbara concurred. Trey versus Tra, announced Scylla, having reviewed the petition submitted by Ms. Trenton and the response by Sam Feldman. I wonder why Mr. Feldman is absent today. He terminated my services, Mary Beth said sharply. Frank gently placed his hand on Mary Beth's, signaling caution. Barbara presented a report of the incident, followed by the security officer's sworn statement, distributing copies to Frank as well. Scylla read the documents aloud for everyone to hear. Frank maintained a calming touch on Mary Beth's arm as she grew increasingly agitated. Mary Beth was visibly upset while listening to the opposing lawyer outline the financial responsibilities and expenditures of Richard, her estranged husband. Financial documents, tax records, and salary details from Richard's employment were displayed. Turning to Frank, Scylla allowed a moment of silence before he nervously confirmed that he had submitted all necessary documentation regarding the household expenses of 1821 Sampson Way. He also mentioned that Mary Beth's parents, Albert and Sandra Rossini, had taken on the financial responsibilities after Richard left Mary Beth. Left me long before this, Richard noted quietly on a notepad. Barbara gave a knowing smirk but remained silent. Yes, I've reviewed everything, thank you, Scylla confirmed. However, I found no W-2 seconds or 1099 forms for Mary Beth Tra, nor any receipts for her share of these expenses. She's a homemaker, Frank explained. Regardless, the children are adults. They don't live at 1821 Sampson Way, Scylla clarified. 2 are at 1109 Daniel Drive, and 1 is at Missouri River State University, though his main address is still 1821 Sampson Way. He's not currently living there. And the cats aren't mine, Richard noted in writing. Barbara's smirk widened. Mary Beth shot a look of intense dislike at both Scylla Ailes and Barbara Trenton. 11. Scylla pondered, quickly reviewing the documents again. She glanced at Richard, then Mary Beth, signaling to proceed. Ignoring the financial aspects, Mary Beth grew increasingly bitter as Barbara detailed the emotional struggles Richard Trahan faced. Frank gently held Mary Beth's arm, indicating her chance to speak would come. Scylla looked impassively at Mary Beth. Mary Beth was astounded to receive the divorce papers, began Frank. She believed herself to be a caring, loyal, and committed spouse to Richard. There was no indication of trouble. Barbara presented a photo of Mary Beth and Chrissy at the Marcy Martin concert, which Frank passed to Mary Beth. It was just a concert, Mary Beth stammered, her fear evident. We had a bit too much to drink and got carried away. Barbara then laid out several more photos before Mary Beth, which Frank reluctantly showed her. Mary Beth exclaimed in panic, "Where did these come from?" From a phone ending in 6564, Richard finally spoke up. "They were sent to me. Isn't that Noel's number?" Mary Beth realized it was Noel's phone number. She felt defeated. As my client mentioned, it was just a concert. Things got a bit out of hand, but it was a one-time event, explained the lawyer. Barbara showed another picture of Noel and Mary Beth at the concert, highlighting the date and time on it. When she presented it again, Frank noticed it was taken the day after the concert. "And what about your so-called friend?" Mary Beth blurted out angrily. "Who?" Richard feigned ignorance, smiling. "You think I didn't know about her?" Mary Beth retorted. "I believe the person Ms. Thomas is mentioning is Amanda Wolf," Barbara said with a smile. "I don't care about her name," Mary Beth dismissed. "My client is helping Ms. Wolf study for her JED," Barbara explained. "She left St. Pius High School without graduating, and Mr. Trahan is assisting her in preparing for her exams." "There's a mirror by the front door," Richard interjected softly. "It was a terrible spot for a mirror, but Noel or Chrissy wanted it there, so that's where it went." "Mr. Trahan, I don't see how this is relevant," Scylla tried to interject. "When you enter or leave, you have to face that mirror," Richard said. "I remember you using it when you unlocked the back gate for the lawn maintenance. It's impossible not to see yourself in it." "I fail to see the point of this," Scylla attempted to cut him off again. "Considering the reflection in that mirror, calling someone else names seems quite hypocritical," Richard remarked with a smirk. "That's enough, Mr. Trahan," Scylla interjected firmly. Barbara gave Richard a stern look. He responded by miming locking his lips and tossing away the key. "Bit late for that," she murmured under her breath. Mary Beth was stunned when Scylla Ailes ruled that Richard would get first place as he had requested. while Mary Beth would keep the second place. Since first place was valued at $124,000 and second place at $183,000, the division wasn't equal. Therefore, Richard would also receive $29,000 to balance the difference. Perhaps Mr. Trahan should retain his 401 Kelvin plan, and Mary Beth Trahan waives any claim to it, Barbara suggested. Scylla glanced at Mary Beth, as did Frank. I have expenses. How am I supposed to manage them? Mary Beth lamented. There's a request for maintenance, for household expenses. Frank mentioned, albeit hesitantly. It's due to Mrs. Trahan's breach of trust that Mr. Trahan initiated the divorce, Scylla pointed out to Frank. The law doesn't favor betrayal. I'm even struggling to afford fuel to get back home, Mary Beth complained. Her eyes sought sympathy from Scylla Ailes. Scylla, acquainted with many a harsh and inequitable split and the financial struggles that often ensued, met Mary Beth's gaze without flinching. He left a mere $25 in our account, Mary Beth grumbled. Plus 5 cents, Richard noted. Barbara exchanged a look with Richard, seeking clarification. 25 years together, 5 children, Richard noted. Quaint, Barbara responded. Trust a math teacher to think of that. Mrs. Trahan, it's been 4 months since Mr. Trahan moved out of the family home, Scylla stated. What have you been doing in the meantime? Richard observed Scylla's stoic expression directed at Mary Beth, then turned to his wife's distressed face. I just kept hoping Richard would return, Mary Beth implored. Or his money, Richard quipped. Enough, Barbara interjected. The next 40 minutes passed in a blur of paperwork. Mary Beth's tears flowed as she signed her name, relinquishing any future financial claims against Richard. She hadn't even considered that with her signature, she was also extinguishing any chance of mending their relationship. The thought of seeking marriage counseling hadn't crossed Mary Beth's mind, nor had it seemed necessary to Frank. Mary Beth had never hinted at wanting to reconcile with her husband. With a final stamp of authority from Scylla Ailes, the notary, the documents were finalized. Mary Beth walked out of the room in a daze, barely noticing the sympathetic glance from the bailiff or hearing Frank Castro's words. Seeking refuge, she ducked into a bathroom. After freshening up, she caught her reflection in the mirror. A middle-aged woman with signs of weariness and gray strands in her hair stared back, prompting her to wonder about the passing of time and her own transformation. Stepping outside, the cold air reminded her that the holiday season was near, leaving her puzzled about her plans, or lack thereof. As she pondered where she had parked, a knock on a window diverted her attention. Richard was there, knocking and waving. A surge of irritation swept over her. Was he smugly celebrating his win? His gesture towards his coffee cup, miming coffee, momentarily disrupted her thoughts. Another gust of cold air nudged her, and, begrudgingly, Mary Beth agreed and entered the nearby diner. Inside, a cheerful waitress served her coffee with a warm smile, offering a momentary comfort. Thank you, Mary Beth murmured, her voice a soft whisper of gratitude. Silence enveloped them as they sipped their coffee, until Richard broke it, his voice tinged with sadness. You know, losing Casey tore a part of me away, he confessed. Me too, Mary Beth responded, her voice laden with sorrow. But I didn't have a partner to confide in, Richard stated. I was right there, Mary Beth countered, her voice raised in frustration. No, you weren't, Richard replied softly. You kept insisting it was my fault, that our child was born with health issues. And 2 decades later, I'm still the one in the wrong, Richard exhaled. Mary Beth recognized this as a replay of a previous argument where she had ignored his words, dismissing his thoughts and feelings. When Richie struggled with addiction, I felt utterly isolated, Richard continued, his voice cracking. My boy, caught in that struggle, and I was powerless to help him. You didn't, Mary Beth started. I did try, Mary Beth, Richard interjected. I tried and didn't succeed, and you've constantly reminded me of my failure. I failed as well, Mary Beth admitted, her voice softening. I needed your support, yet it felt like you had already left, Richard said. Mary Beth was on the verge of blaming him again, negating his feelings. But then, as the waitress topped off their coffee, Richard pushed 2 20s across the table. Here, for your gas, he offered kindly. Thank you, she responded, hastily taking the money. But, well, it's hard to say, Richard continued. I'll be canceling the insurance at the end of the month. And there are still 19 payments due. Oh, Mary Beth uttered. The house insurance is covered until March with State Farm, Richard went on. But you'll need to arrange your own after that. And the challenges continue, Mary Beth murmured under her breath. We have an excellent pumpkin pie, the waitress chimed in, trying to lighten the mood. Or perhaps an apple one. Do you still want the cherry pie? Richard inquired. Absolutely, how about you? She responded. Thinking of having the cherry pie, Mary Beth. Richard probed further. Mary Beth nodded affirmatively. Richard signaled for 2 servings. Shortly after, the server delivered 2 slices of cherry pie, each topped with a scoop of vanilla ice cream that was gently melting, to Richard and Mary Beth's table before she returned to attend to other patrons. Mary Beth hadn't realized her appetite until then. She eagerly consumed the warm pie and then turned her attention to the ice cream. Richard pushed his plate towards her, and she happily finished his portion of ice cream too. Suddenly, Mary Beth's thoughts were interrupted by the sight of a flag waving across the street, which reminded her of something. The windbreaker, she blurted out. What about it? Richard queried as he finished his coffee. You forgot your yellow windbreaker, she reminded him. And what size is that? He asked. I'm not sure, maybe a 14. Mary Beth guessed. No, it's 50, Richard corrected, reminiscing. That's what I wore when we got married. Remember how you used to sing that funny song about being 250 for my shirt? It used to make us laugh. Mary Beth smiled at the memory, and the windbreaker's size. He continued to quiz her. I really can't recall, she confessed. It's XL, just like those shirts, Richard clarified. And the slippers are size 13. Mary Beth nodded, absorbing the details. The server returned to check if they needed anything else. Richard paid with a 20, and as Mary Beth looked up, she found Richard had already left, leaving a touch of warmth where he had briefly held her hand. Calls to Noel's phone were unanswered, leading to a voicemail where Mary Beth left a message expressing her confusion and hurt. Why? Why did you send those pictures to Richard? She resolved then to never contact Noel again. When Mary Beth called Jewel, she got through and was invited over to use Jewel's computer for job hunting. Did you hear about Curtis Construction, where Buddy is employed? Jewel shared as Mary Beth arrived. They hired a new receptionist, but it turned out she was trying to trick them. Is that so? Mary Beth inquired, intrigued. Yeah, she claimed to have an accident on a loose carpet, Jewel explained, making quotation marks in the air with her fingers around the word accident. Could you help me with my resume? Mary Beth asked hopefully. Lyle Curtis met with Mary Beth and was impressed. He noticed her as a short, cheerful woman who carried herself with experience and wisdom. Her sparse employment history didn't concern him. He valued her home management and parenting skills. After a warm handshake, Mary Beth was introduced to the office's phone and computer systems. Once Lyle departed for a site visit, Mary Beth allowed herself a moment of joy, performing a little victory dance at her desk. Returning home after her successful first day, Mary Beth was quick to express her gratitude to Jewel and Buddy, showing a happiness they hadn't seen in her before. However, her joy faded upon turning on her cell phone and discovering messages from Jackie and Andy. They relayed Richard's ultimatum to leave their home within 2 weeks. He has no right, exclaimed Jackie. Mom, what's going on? Andy pressed, visibly upset by the recent events and their implications. Mary Beth, feeling a heavy realization, acknowledged, Oh my goodness, it's true, isn't it? This is what I've allowed to happen. She later informed Andy, who had answered his phone, Dad won the house in the divorce. Like he said, you've got 2 weeks. I'd move quickly if I were you. Find somewhere new and then sort out the house. When Andy brought up Richie's passing in a subsequent conversation, Mary Beth firmly closed the chapter, indicating that it was time to move on. Jackie received a similar call, marking a clear end to that period of their lives. To Mary Beth's dismay, Jackie and Andy did end up moving in with her, making her sympathize somewhat with Richard's previous struggles of managing expenses for 2 households. The day before Thanksgiving, Lyle generously gave each of his employees a 12-pound turkey and allowed them to leave work early. Mary Beth took her turkey to her parents' house, where her mother Sandra was preparing the Thanksgiving feast, as she had done for many years. Looks like you're the chef again, Mary Beth remarked. Sandra gave her daughter a long look, sensing her genuine offer to help, and smiled, gently touching Mary Beth's face. Maybe you can take over next year. I have everything ready for today, Sandra replied. Mary Beth drove home feeling nearly content, a mood that lasted until she saw Jackie's car and Andy's truck in the driveway, unchanged from the morning. Inside, she found Jackie in an overly casual outfit of a t-shirt and shorts, with Andy in his old football jersey, lounging on the sofa and bickering over what to watch on TV, with their breakfast dishes still out. Turning the TV off abruptly, Mary Beth announced, Enough. You both have 2 weeks to either find full-time work or a new place to live. And Jackie, please dress more appropriately, especially around your brother. Andy, tidy yourself up. After tossing the remote aside and heading down the hallway, she emphasized her point, I mean it. 2 weeks start now. And clean up after yourselves. I'm not here to clean up your mess. When First Place was valued at $124,000, the assessment was based on neighborhood sales comparison. Richard supplied floor plans and the home's exterior appearance. The appraiser hadn't inspected the interior, missing the neglect by 2 careless residents that had damaged the carpets, kitchen, and bathroom fixtures. Upon issuing the eviction notice, Richard discovered Jackie had allowed her acquaintance to damage the property extensively. Richard, reflecting on the house's state and his family dynamics, considered changing his will to exclude his children, balancing his roles as a teacher at St. Pius, a coach, and his fleeting encounters with Mandy Wolf. Richard was dedicated to renovating the place. He had made it clear to Mandy that their relationship wouldn't last, citing his plans to move and their age difference. Mandy, understanding yet emotional, expressed her desire to cherish their moments together. Their relationship deepened after a shared experience at Benny's Burger Bar, where Mandy encouraged Richard to try new things, leading to shared laughter and a more intense connection. She openly confessed her feelings, while Richard acknowledged his deep affection for her. After finishing their burgers, she snuggled closer to him as they sat together. Her hand casually rested on his thigh, tracing gentle patterns. Instead of taking him back to where he was staying, Mandy headed to her own apartment. "Mandy, listen, I'm married," Richard confessed. "Is it because I'm overweight?" Mandy inquired. "What? No, Mandy, it's not that." Richard tried to explain. "It seems your wife isn't exactly tied down," Mandy pointed out, unlocking her apartment door. "So, why should you be?" Before Richard could respond, Mandy led him inside. She closed the door, leaned against it, and kissed him. Amanda Wolf was unmistakably voluptuous. Her frame was soft and full, with generous curves. Her ample figure was soft to the touch, each part of her body full and round. She played with a strand of her blonde hair nervously. "I really am a blonde," she stated, a bit self-aware. Richard, however, was captivated by the sincere and eager person before him. He removed his shirt, revealing his fit torso. Mandy's eyes widened at the sight of Richard's athletic build. He then slipped off his shoes, revealing more of himself, which brought a nearly imperceptible smile to her face. As Richard continued, Mandy was taken aback. She had her experiences, but Richard was notably different, making her feel a mix of anticipation and surprise. "Oh," she exclaimed softly, overwhelmed by the moment. When he gently guided her onto her bed, Mandy expected Richard to rush into the moment, overcome by passion. Instead, she was met with soft, tender kisses and a powerful, caring embrace. Richard connected with Mandy Wolf deeply, cherishing every moment. He explored and adored her with gentle kisses and caresses. When he tenderly kissed her, it was a new, exhilarating experience for Mandy, leading her to express her intense emotions loudly. "Do we need protection?" Richard inquired, tracing kisses back to Mandy's breathless expression. Uncovered, Mandy managed to say between breaths. Mandy vocalized her feelings loudly again as they became even more intimate. She embraced Richard tightly, expressing her affection and pulling him closer with every breath. In the aftermath, Richard didn't just leave, he stayed, continuing to hold and caress her, deepening their connection. Then, shifting positions, he encouraged Mandy to be on top, contradicting anyone who doubted her strength. Richard guided the moment, affirming his presence and support. Mandy was overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience, feeling sensations she had never felt before, which left her in awe. For Richard, being with Mandy was refreshingly genuine and intimate, a stark contrast to his past experiences. He was so moved that he nearly confessed his growing feelings for her. He acknowledged the difference in their experiences and ages, focusing on the present moment and the unique connection they shared as they continued to explore their bond deeply. Richard once again embraced Mandy closely, their bodies connecting deeply. Afterward, they lay together, Richard's arms around her, Mandy nestled against him, her curves fitting snugly against his form. Mandy was suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of regret. She lamented over her past choices, the times she sought acceptance through others, and the comfort she tried to find in food during moments of solitude. As Mandy wept, Richard offered his comfort, then went to fetch a damp washcloth to tenderly wipe her tears. She eventually stood up, made her way to the bathroom for a moment of privacy, and then returned to bed in her comfortable sleepwear. "Think you can sleep in something as fetching as that?" Richard teased gently. A week after their intimate moment, Mandy broached the subject of pursuing her Jed with Richard, half expecting dismissal or ridicule, similar to the demeaning views she'd encountered from others like Colette. Richard, however, responded with encouragement, promising to support her with the necessary resources. While Richard was honest about assisting Mandy with her studies to his acquaintances, he kept the details of their personal arrangement private. Mandy did visit the address Richard mentioned, touring each room with a mix of wonder and dismay at the state of the place, from stained carpets to a cracked mirror and damaged bathroom fixtures. Despite the damage, Richard committed to repairing what he could, though some tasks required professional attention, leading him to reluctantly hire outside help. Richard mentally revisited his decision, contemplating altering his will to exclude his self-centered, immature offspring. Sandra extended an invitation to Richard for Thanksgiving at her home, but he politely declined. Instead, he chose to spend the day with Mandy, helping those in need at a homeless shelter, providing comfort to those without a place or family to call their own. During the event, Monsignor Tipton raised an eyebrow when Mandy affectionately called Richard honey, but Richard remained silent on the matter. Later that evening, as Richard and Mandy relaxed together, his phone interrupted the quiet. It was Mary Beth calling, and Richard hesitated to answer. Mandy suggested it might be about the children. The day's experiences, especially seeing the children at the shelter, had deeply affected Mandy. She remembered a little girl whose gaze was hauntingly empty, a stark reminder of the absence of hope, even on Thanksgiving. Reluctantly, Richard answered the call. "Yes," he asked, striving to keep his tone even. "You were right," Mary Beth confessed. "Our kids are utterly spoilt." Mary Beth shared her recent confrontation with Andy and Jackie, giving them an ultimatum to secure employment within 2 weeks or find another place to live. Richard offered advice, emphasizing the importance of them understanding the seriousness of their situation and that temporary jobs wouldn't suffice. Andy realized the gravity of his mother's words. Despite feeling bitter towards his parents, he acknowledged the harshness of the upcoming winter in Benhurst, Colorado. Recognizing that his friends and acquaintances were unlikely to offer him shelter, he cleaned up his appearance and secured a job at Fidelity Savings and Loans as a teller within 5 days. Jackie, however, dismissed her mother's warning, not seeking employment and later revealing her pregnancy as a justification. Her logic was that job hunting was futile if she'd soon need to leave for maternity reason. In disbelief, Mary Beth challenged her, questioning the necessities Jackie had been acquiring, hinting at her skepticism. Frustrated and determined, Mary Beth took decisive action by confiscating the cell phone, house, and car keys from Jackie, all of which she had been financing, signaling a tough love approach to teach her daughter responsibility. Richard's heart ached as he told Jackie she could no longer manipulate or deceive their family. Al and Sandra, her grandparents, offered their couch for a week. "But we have a guest room," Jackie protested. "Maybe we'll have guests soon, especially with Christmas coming," Al hinted. "And you shouldn't get too comfortable," added Sandra with a knowing smile. "You need to find a job, remember." Jackie reluctantly took a job at Benny's Burger Bar, known for its high employee turnover. Working there, she experienced the disdain she once showed its employees, learning how tough it was to remain pleasant with difficult customers. At Benny's, Jackie occasionally saw her father and the girl she had once ridiculed. Neither Richard nor Mandy treated her poorly, but their coolness was evident. After a week, despite having a job, Al and Sandra asked Jackie where she wanted to go next. Mary Beth, another relative, said she wished Jackie well but couldn't offer her a place. So, Jackie ended up living with Rebecca Sanders, an old high school friend, discovering the new challenge of sharing responsibilities and personal space. Rebecca had her quirks, she was messy, rarely cleaned up, and was lax about personal hygiene. The state of the apartment, including the questionable cleanliness of Rebecca's bed, left Jackie uncomfortable and frustrated. When Jackie reached out to Mary Beth again, she was invited for Christmas, with a hint of possible reconciliation. On Christmas Day, Mary Beth noticed a change in Jackie, seeing signs of maturity and growth. Jackie was allowed to return home, but it was clear the arrangement was temporary and conditional. Noel and Chrissy made it their mission to influence Jewel, Mary Beth's neighbor, subtly undermining her perception of her husband, Buddy. They suggested that Buddy's small lapses, like being a bit late without calling, were signs of disregard. They insinuated that his evenings out were more sinister than just friendly gatherings, hinting at disloyalty. They painted him as inconsiderate, highlighting the imbalance in their leisure time. Their pastime was to destabilize relationships, turning spouses against each other, as they had previously done with Mary Beth. Their tactics seemed to be working on Jewel, who began to notice every flaw in Buddy that Noel and Chrissy emphasized. On a snowy day when most places were closed, Mary Beth requested her husband, Andy, to clear the snow at their home. As Andy worked outside, Jewel observed him, unfavorably comparing her husband's physique to Andy's more robust form. Later, Jewel, feeling spontaneous, slipped into something more comfortable and offered Andy hot cocoa as a friendly gesture. Andy, strong and engaging, impressed Jewel, contrasting sharply with her husband's more modest demeanor. After their interaction, Jewel decided to distance herself from Noel and Chrissy's manipulation and, with a respectful manner, informed Buddy of her decision to leave, focusing on the need for change rather than its flaws. The day following Martin Luther King Day, Jewel enlisted Barbara Trenton to be her legal advocate in her divorce proceedings. Barbara expressed her understanding when Jewel expressed her desire for a swift and uncomplicated divorce. Subsequently, Jewel and Andy took up residence together in an apartment. Mary Beth was incensed by her son's actions, yet she found solace in having fewer responsibilities at home. While she felt a pang of empathy for Buddy, she dismissed his vengeful ideas without consideration. Richard finalized the renovations and improvements at 1109 Daniel Drive early in June. Gail Severn, a highly regarded real estate agent, cautioned Richard that June was typically challenging for property sales, given the seasonal hustle with families and their various activities. Richard simply advised, "Just do your best." "I really like the color choices," Gail complimented during her tour of the house, noting the gas stove as a smart choice. After some deliberation, she recommended pricing the house at $130,000, aiming for a swift transaction. It was appraised at $124,000, but I've invested nearly $30,000 in renovations, Richard pointed out. "Let's start at $149,000 and see if they negotiate down to $130,000. "All right, you lead," Gail responded with a smile. She hosted an open house the second Sunday in June, and later that evening, informed Richard of 3 bids, $145,000, $142,900, and $151,000. "Let's accept the first offer that comes with earnest money to seal the deal," Richard suggested confidently. After the call, he shared the good news, boasting a little. "Never underestimate a math teacher," Mandy exclaimed, sharing in Richard's triumph. Yet, her mood shifted to sorrow as she tearfully watched Richard drive away, leaving a void in her life. Lying in her spacious, empty bed, Mandy felt the sting of solitude. On the road, leaving Colorado behind, Richard contemplated messaging Mary Beth to inform her of his departure. Despite the end of their long association, he felt it was significant to let her know he was moving on. Mary Beth sank into the couch, her gaze fixed on the empty space of her living room wall. It was once adorned with his 2011 state finals physics bowl plaque, now only marked by a faded patch where it used to hang. With a heavy sigh, she picked up her phone and texted Richard, "Be safe." In Degard, Louisiana, Richard grumbled internally about the oppressive humidity, mindful not to utter a word lest his mother overhear and reprimand him. He wrestled with the lawnmower, pushing it through the stubborn, thick grass, surprised that it had only been 2 weeks since the last mow. After this, I still need to tackle my own yard, he thought, dabbing his brow with his shirt. Cabrini High School had warmly welcomed Richard Trahan to their team, valuing his contribution on the football field. Coach Marvin Degrapont and Father Brighton had high expectations for a successful season. However, their attitudes soured when they realized Richard, as an assistant coach, insisted on academic rigor for his players in math. "I thought my job was to teach," Richard had countered when confronted. "We need to win," Father Brighton had insisted sharply. "Look, Trahan," Degrapont had added, Bignod's agile and fast. "It doesn't matter if he struggles with basic math. I care about their education," Richard retorted. "What if Bignod can no longer rely on his physical abilities? We'll find someone who can replace him," was Father Brighton's blunt reply, with Degrapont hinting at finding a more lenient teacher. Camille, Richard's mother, advised him to reflect on the situation. Battling through the lawn's overgrowth, Richard pondered, hoping for endurance. After the laborious task, Camille insisted he clean up before serving him a meal of ham steaks. "Your yard looks great," Camille said with a smile. "It should," Richard replied, finishing his meal. "I love you, Mom, but I need to take care of my own lawn now. Don't forget you're taking me to church tomorrow, okay?" Camille reminded him. "Of course, Mom," Richard assured her. After selling his old house on Daniel Drive, Richard bought a 3-bedroom ranch on Bayshio Street. He paid half the price up front and got a mortgage for the rest. He spent a decent amount on furnishing the place, adding a hot tub on the patio and a tall fence for privacy. Upon arriving home, Richard contemplated delaying mowing his lawn until the next day. However, remembering his promise to take his mother to church, he decided against it. Camille's worsening glaucoma made her uncomfortable driving. "Thankfully, she can still cook well," Richard muttered to himself after a loud burp. Just as Richard was storing his lawnmower, his phone rang. It was his mother, which made him anxious. "Hello," he answered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We'll have someone joining us for church tomorrow," Camille informed him. "Are we taking your car then?" "Yes, of course," she replied, sounding a bit irritated. "It's not Marie, is it?" Richard asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "Don't worry about who it is," Camille retorted before ending the call. Richard mumbled to the silent phone. Marie has always been unappealing. Marie Soilo, née Duvalier, was not considered attractive in school. However, Camille was fond of her. Despite Marie's looks, Richard acknowledged her friendly nature. Richard pondered over Marie's late husband, Harry Soilo, whom he'd never met. The Soilos had a family of unique-looking individuals. Richard found it peculiar how Camille often tried to bring him and Marie together. Richard was always courteous when thinking of his former classmate. He often imagined, in the quiet of his dimly lit, curtained room, that he was back with Mandy Wolf, noticing how similar she was in appearance to Marie. "Those kids of hers, though," Richard pondered. "I've got 3 of my own who are quite the handful, though Peter's not so bad." Despite teaching at Cabrini, Richard didn't go to St. Richard's Church. He found Father Brighton's way of leading Mass too harsh and couldn't help but feel the priest was not genuine. "It's not my place to judge," Richard mused, "but it's tough to listen when you don't respect the one talking." Camille, his wife, preferred the services at St. Thomas Aquinas with Father Goldbred, so they and their son attended Mass there on Sundays. Depending on how they felt afterward, they would either visit their favorite brunch spot, grab donuts and coffee, or head out for a country breakfast. "Is that Marie and her daughter, Patty Ann, over there? Looks like we'll hit the donut place and make it quick," Richard thought, stepping into the shower, eager for the comforting spray of water. In the solitude of his shower, Richard's thoughts often drifted to Mandy, her image more vivid in his mind than that of Mary Beth, to whom he had been committed for many years. The memories of his brief time with Mandy lingered strongly, overshadowing his longer shared experiences with Mary Beth. Deciding against contacting Mandy to avoid reopening old wounds, Richard set his alarm, and weariness from the day's heat and work quickly ushered him into sleep. In the morning, Richard had a quick breakfast of a power bar and 2 cups of coffee, followed by his usual routine of shaving and showering. He dressed with care, preparing to interact politely with Marie and Patty Ann Soilo. "You're going to earn some points in heaven for this," Richard remarked, paraphrasing Camille's usual encouragement for facing tough situations. "You know, doing the right thing gets noticed upstairs. What if I've already got more points than I need?" Richard would joke, which always got him a playful scold from Camille. "Both heaven and I are watching," Camille would say, half serious. "Trust me, you haven't got more than your fair share of good deeds." He then drove to his mother's place, parking his truck on the street to leave enough space for Camille's bulky 1989 Cadillac Eldorado to maneuver out of the garage. "Yes, Mom, it's really that massive," Richard commented as he approached Camille's house, joking that it could be spotted from outer space. "I'm here, Mom," Richard announced upon arrival. "There's no need to shout," Camille chided, making her way down the hallway. Richard couldn't help but smile. Camille's hearing wasn't what it used to be, leading to frequent miscommunications about speaking too softly or too loudly. "And where's Marie?" Richard inquired as Camille entered the room. "She couldn't make it," Camille informed him, planting a kiss on his cheek. "It's just me," Mandy declared, appearing in the living room with a radiant smile. Richard, taken aback, collapsed to the floor in surprise. "You're really here," he stammered. "Yes, I remember everything you've said, and it's all correct," Mandy reassured, sitting down across from him. "What's that?" "Speak up," Camille interjected, thinking they were speaking too softly. "You're much older, I'm just starting out in life," Mandy recounted Richard's concerns. "None of that matters to me," Richard said abruptly. "And I don't care either," Mandy said, her voice breaking as tears welled up in her eyes. "Richard, all I want is to be with you." "I love you," Richard confessed. In the living room of his mother's house, Richard and Mandy shared a heartfelt embrace, clinging to each other with intense emotion. They both held on tightly, conveying their deep connection. "We still have to attend Mass," Camille interjected, reminding them of their plans. For Richard, sitting through Mass was agonizing. He was consumed with thoughts of leaving with Mandy, longing to escape to a place where they could be alone. "Afterward, we can hit up side by side. You're going to love their omelet bar," Camille mentioned as the service finally ended. While enjoying omelets filled with cheese and various fillings, Mandy and Richard engaged in deep conversation. Camille, however, kept pointing out the all-you-can-eat aspect of the buffet, urging them to get their money's worth. During her time with Richard, Mandy had become more mindful about her eating habits and even started doing some light exercises. She had managed to lose weight, going from 209 pounds down to 186. However, after Richard left, Mandy's resolve weakened. She quickly reverted to her old eating habits, regaining the weight she had lost. At Benny's Burger Bar, when Mandy ordered a lavish meal, Jackie, Richard's daughter, greeted her but suggested a smaller, more moderate order. "Trahan, what are you doing?" Kenneth Stillman, the manager, whispered in disapproval. "Food isn't the solution," Jackie gently told Mandy, showing concern rather than judgment, despite her boss's dismay. "It's pronounced Traha," Mandy corrected Kenneth, paying for the healthier meal option that Jackie had insisted on. After finishing her meal, Mandy left Benny's with a friendly wave to Jackie, then drove back to Stanley's. Stan Murdoch's eyebrows rose as Mandy walked into the store, her cheerful grin lighting up her round face, a sight he hadn't seen in some time. "Mr. Murdoch, I need to give my 2 weeks' notice," Mandy announced, clocking in for her shift. Stan, taken aback, sputtered, "What? Mandy, are you trying to negotiate a raise? Because threatening to leave isn't the way to do it, you know." By closing time, it was clear Mandy was serious about leaving. Stan exhaled deeply, facing the daunting task of reviewing the piles of job applications they had accumulated over the last 3 months. Mandy's departure didn't just affect Stan. Her landlord was also disappointed. She had been an excellent resident. When he posted the vacancy online, he quickly received 2 applications, one from Jackie Trahan and another from Rebecca Sanders. During the tour, Rebecca tried to charm the elderly landlord, much to his amusement. However, the landlord's wife, after doing some background checks, discovered Rebecca's checkered rental history. Thus, the apartment went to Jackie, who was looking for a bit of independence and also to provide some for her mother. Jackie humorously mentioned to Mary Beth, "This way, you and Mr. Curtis can stop hiding your meetings," making Mary Beth turn red with embarrassment. Meanwhile, Mandy drove past breathtaking sceneries, her focus solely on the journey ahead, the long stretches of road leading her to Richard. Richard had sent Mandy his mother's address, saying he would stay with Camille until he found a place of his own. Mandy navigated to Camille's address, following her GPS closely. Arriving at a house with a well-kept lawn, Mandy stepped out of her car, fatigued. Camille greeted her, apologizing for not hearing the doorbell earlier, and welcomed Mandy inside. "I'm Mandy, Mandy Wolf. Is Richard here?" "Oh, dear, you just missed him," Camille responded sympathetically. "Ma'am, I know we haven't met, but it's quite urgent," Mandy confided. Camille, understanding the situation, invited Mandy in, showed her to the restroom, and then offered her something to eat. As they shared a meal of ham steak, Mandy explained her connection to Richard and her eagerness to see him. Camille, touched by the story, reassured Mandy and planned to introduce her to Richard at the next opportunity, possibly during a church visit. "You'll be staying in Richard's old room, okay?" Camille mentioned. "You attend church, don't you?" "Not since my mom kicked me out," Mandy confessed. "Why did she do that?" Camille inquired. "Left school," Mandy explained. "She refused to support a high school dropout. She probably wanted you to reconsider," Camille figured. "But what does it have to do with not going to church?" During brunch, Camille noticed that neither Richard nor Mandy seemed keen on the food. She complimented the cinnamon rolls, the biscuits and gravy, and the hash browns. Yet, Richard and Mandy just exchanged smiles, hardly touching their plates. When Richard parked the car in the garage, Camille gave him a stern look. "She's a nice girl, treat her well, understand?" Camille emphasized. "Yes, ma'am," Richard responded, grinning at his mother. Amanda found work at St. Pius in the cafeteria, working from 10 to 1. Initially, she visited Camille after work, but their interests differed greatly, especially in television shows. Amanda couldn't forget the girl at the Benhurst, Colorado, homeless shelter who wouldn't smile. This memory prompted her to start volunteering at the Bank Street shelter in Degard, Louisiana. She was struck by the limited supplies there, especially compared to the waste at St. Pius. After discussing with Father Brighton, Amanda managed to arrange for food donations to the shelter. "All right," Father Brighton conceded, wanting to end the conversation. "You and your boyfriend sure are persistent." Amanda's dedication at the shelter led to uncovering misconduct by a staff member. She played a vital role in the investigation and support of the affected individuals. Following the staff member's arrest, Amanda was appointed assistant director of the shelter. Carmela, the director of the shelter, approached Amanda to help raise additional donations. Initially hesitant, the image of a despairing young girl spurred Amanda to agree. Gordon King from King Sanitation permitted Amanda Wolf to appeal to his employees. Driven by the memory of the girl, Amanda passionately advocated for support, emphasizing the impact they could have on transforming despair into hope. The next day, overwhelmed by the community's generosity, Carmela informed Amanda that they shared surplus donations with another shelter. A little boy, showcasing his new toy truck, caught Amanda's attention, leading to a playful and heartwarming interaction. Furthermore, Amanda was invited by Dean Robert Sims to speak at a University of Louisiana at Degard event. Despite feeling self-conscious about her appearance, her partner, Richard, complimented her in a light-hearted manner, boosting her confidence. Although Amanda felt uncomfortable in the evening gown, Richard's affection was constant throughout the event. When it was her turn to speak, she excused herself from his playful advances and confidently approached the podium to address the audience. She gazed at the indifferent, sometimes mocking faces of the university's faculty. As a high school dropout, she questioned her credibility to address these esteemed academics. Visions of a young girl with empty, despairing eyes and a thin, haggard face haunted her. Nearly 5 miles from this splendid campus lies a starkly contrasting place, Amanda began. Close to these halls of education, there's a building where people learn the harsh realities of life, she continued. In that place, people master the art of guarding their belongings, scavenging through trash for our discarded food, and resorting to deceit and theft for their needs. They learn the essentials of surviving after losing it all. Amanda shared with the now slightly uneasy audience the everyday conflicts and struggles occurring just a short distance from their protected academic environment. "It's about more than just financial contributions," Amanda explained. "We are challenging you to do something more demanding than merely opening your wallets. We invite you to dedicate your time at our shelter, helping those in need, the transient and the destitute, to see that there is hope and aspirations beyond mere survival." She recounted her own journey, from being a dropout to achieving her diploma through the kindness of someone who invested time in her education, emphasizing the transformative power of personal attention and support. The event concluded at 9:30, but discussions and offers of help continued until nearly 11, as Richard and Amanda engaged with the faculty. Amanda, holding Richard's hand, responded with a light-hearted quip to a professor's curious question about her potential different life path had she completed college. My comment, torturous path. Their marriage had been trashed by the tragedies and the lack of partnership and communication. Thought it was weird and borderline moronic that Jewel ditched her soulmate for the young Andy. Subscribe if you enjoyed this ending, and I will see you in the next relationship story.